Howdy.
Hello, good afternoon or good morning if you're still in the West Coast or joining us from Hawaii or Alaska, maybe, hopefully. So yeah, let's see, we can get started. If folks want to introduce themselves at on the chat, Annie and who is this? Julia Templeman have done.
I think that's
Uh,
Templeton.
Temple. Oh, sorry. Yeah, guys, they have done. Feel free to do so. We would love to know, where you're all coming from, and a little bit about yourself. You can put your affiliation if you want. Pronouns are always welcome. Yeah. So without further ado, let's see. I'm getting used to this platform itself, so please be please be understanding if if I mess up with like presentation things here and there. But let's see. So,
Welcome. Yeah, welcome to our panel. It couldn't happen here. We're going to talk about harassment and discrimination, progressive spaces. Both me and Tony come at this topic from a little bit different places, but this is something that we really think is unique to a unique conversation that needs to happen within progressive spaces, especially the values that we have and the way that we actually live up to our values when it comes to harassment and discrimination. And we'll go a little bit more into who we are and um, this presentation in general, but I'm really excited that everyone could join us and we could have this conversation at Netroots.
yeah, and also, if you have any questions throughout, feel free to throw them in the chat, or we do have a dedicated section at the end for our Q&A, as well as our contact information at the end slides. So, we'll, feel free to keep questions that you have, and if you don't feel safe asking them, you could just email them to us as well. With that being said, let's get started. Lily, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, howdy. I am Lily Adams. I'm the digital director for Foundation Blue Media. We specialize in digital advertising, working mostly with state and local candidates. I come mostly from a digital and field background, and that's how I kind of know Tony. We both do digital work.
Yeah, so my name is Tony. My pronouns are he, him, and I am the digital director at Immigrants Rising, which is a fiscally sponsored project of community initiatives that works to help achieve undocumented young people achieve their career and educational goals. So, Lily has definitely more experience in like campaign world. But I've been kind of like entrenched in like progressive spaces myself, and kind of like in more of like a nonprofit C3, C4 settings. So that's the kind of the diversity of perspectives that we are going to bring to this conversation, and we hope that you find both of our perspectives unique and useful to you. So before we get started, I guess like these aren't, I mean, like I don't say ground rules, but they are ground rules, I guess. So, so first of all, none of us are lawyers.
Or
And
HR specialists.
yeah, or HR specialists, or yeah. So we, whatever we say here is not legal advice. Maybe it's like some kind of like personal / professional advice, but not like, like so. FYI. And the affiliation that we mentioned before, or any of the workplaces that we mentioned by name or otherwise implied, are not reflective out are not reflective of the values of community initiatives / Immigrants Rising, our fiscal sponsor and our name, or Foundation Blue Media, where Lily works. And while so Lily and I are going to be sharing something, when we talk through this, like a lot of the information that we're going to be share is public and anonymized as much as possible. But if you're in the audience and what you share might not be, so when you go out into the world and talk about this presentation with other people, please be mindful of like what's said in the audience, because we don't really have control over that. So just be respectful of others' privacies. Yeah, and again, really, as like the title of the presentation says, like that's what you would do, do to help create safe spaces for all, in the broader progressive sphere. So let's talk about harassment.
Oh, so I wanted to go over a little bit why we are originally doing this presentation and why this work was important to me and why we wanted to do this panel in the first place. So as you saw before, me and Tony come to politics from a digital perspective. We are not HR professionals, we're not lawyers. And the way that I got involved with sexual harassment and gender discrimination, politics and how it affects people in progressive spaces was from it happening to me. I'm from Texas originally, and I'm currently there right now. But I went to a very conservative high school. When I came out as queer in high school, I experienced a lot of discrimination and felt generally unwelcomed as both a woman and a queer person in my state. That working in progressive spaces and politics with other progressive folks felt like a really natural and safe space for me because I assumed we all had the same values, that I was going to be treated well, that I came into those spaces thinking that everyone had good intentions. And um, it felt really natural for me the day after I graduate high school to start working in politics. And on my first major campaign that I worked on, I started to be sexually harassed by one of my coworkers. I was 19 at the time. I didn't really understand that what he was doing was wrong. It was a lot of pressuring me to drink alcohol, telling me like what I shouldn't wear, being very possessive around me, trying to touch me. It was stuff that it was easy to brush off because I had never really had a conversation with anyone about what sexual harassment looked like in progressive spaces, because I assumed he was a good Democrat, good progressive, just like me. And so when he was doing this stuff, it was, I assumed the best intentions and I was able to kind of laugh it off. And then I spoke about it to a coworker, was encouraged to talk to it about my boss. And what happened next has changed my life. I really thought it was just going to be a conversation where I was going to be told you're overreacting. What he did is fine. And then next thing I know, I'm talking to the head of our HR team, being asked to prove evidence of what happened, that what I said happened actually happened, being asked to come up with solutions to the issue. All this stuff that um, at 19 years old, I never thought this was going to happen to me. And I also had no idea what the process was. And I remember sitting in that room sobbing, trying to pull up any text messages that I could have as proof, trying to find any proof that I had that I was not prepared to come with, trying to make people believe that what I was saying was true. And I remember at one point I said, if I'd known that this is what it was going to be like, I would have never come forward. I would have just endured it. Um, and after I got out of that campaign and I realized that I didn't want anyone to ever feel like that. Sexual harassment, discrimination, it happens in every workplace, but you don't have to be blindsided by it. There is definitely ways that we can talk about this and prepare campaigns and organizations to educate their employees on what the process is for sexual harassment is, for discrimination, and just making it clear that like most people don't know what to do when it happens. And that's something I've experienced, whether it's me experiencing the harassment or helping navigate someone else through it, is that people generally don't know what to do. And so by having conversations like this, I think it inspires people to share their stories as well and feel comfortable coming forward with them, but also helps inspire healthier, safer workplaces where people are willing to put in the work to actually support folks and make it clear that whenever they are experiencing harassment, they know what to do and they know what the expectations are from HR or whoever they're reporting it to. So there's some things in this conversation that I have learned through navigating harassment with personally, and then also from helping other folks navigate it too. And no two workplaces are exactly the same, but these are some tips and advice that you can use to go back to your organization's campaigns and create healthier work environments, but also just be not like armed with the knowledge that you're not alone in this. This is something that happens in every workplace. and it is unique in progressive spaces how we should be handling it because of our shared values. But just want to let everybody know that like they're not alone, and this happens everywhere, and we should be talking about it.
Yeah. So adding on to that is you know, I come from, I come from like a pretty, I mean, I come from northern New Jersey, which is like, kind of like a liberal bastion, yes, but I also grew up in like a very, like a conservative Korean American, society. So that's my background, and through, like being a queer, undocumented, Asian American man, like it's whatever spaces I end up in, I always find that like there's some like misalignment, and even though I when I'm at like like I'm a mission driven organizations, I would think that their mission will be the same as mine, but sometimes they're not, and like that's something that I've definitely learned. And I think what separates like Lily's experience and my experience is that like Lily has taken the step to actually be proactive about like approaching HR and things like that. Whereas like for me, like I think up until like fairly recently, I don't I have I haven't really had worked up the courage to really approach HR. If there were cases of discrimination, if there were things that were happening that were that were not appropriate for the workplace. Um, and also, a lot of the organizations that I worked in were very, very small. So, they didn't have an HR department. So we're also going to talk about campaigns and organizations who don't necessarily have like an HR department or an HR person, throughout this presentation as well. So hopefully, all of this like pertinent to you. So, one more thing actually, in the 2020 cycle, there was this a thing that went around called the spreadsheet. It lasted for all of like I want to say like 2 days before it got taken down. And it essentially was like like progressives, who displayed like racially and sexually harassing behavior. So we know that this problem, this is like a problem that's endemic to our sector. We, some of the names that, I mean, Lily has never seen that sheet. I've had access to that sheet, and it was just eye opening to see that like, hey, this isn't something that I deal with by myself. This is something that it happens to everyone, as in like like all in all the campaigns, we saw, I'm not going to name names, but there were like a lot of like prominent candidates on campaigns who who were on that spreadsheet. So it gave me like pause and like a chance to really reflect, like okay, so this is something that needs to be changed. I mean, like you would like until like, I mean, I assume that that these things were going on, yes, but I had no idea to like what extent, and what the spread was. There's an excellent BuzzFeed article about the spreadsheet if you want to Google it. But yeah, so but the purpose of this is how to deal with the harassment that comes on. So so let's talk about the whole process of going through, going, accepting the job, going through, and what to do afterwards.
It's cut off, but these are pictures of us before the world broke us. We've been in politics for a while. We're a little bit broken, but we're still striving to make change.
Yeah, yeah. Look at that innocent face with like no crow's feet.
I think I was already broken by the point that my picture was. That was before election day in 2016. I had no idea what was coming. The worst day of my life. If you want to go to the next slide.
Yeah.
Cool. So before I experienced harassment, I always treated my contracts and NDAs as like the same thing whenever you get a pop-up message from iPhone being like, we've updated our privacy policy. Here's 20,000 pages of legalese, read it. And you kind of just click like, yeah, sure. All right. I believe you. Sounds good to me. first time I got my contract, it was my first paid job where I was an intern. I was just so excited. I wanted to get started. I signed it right away. Um, Looking back, that's not what you should do. When you get a contract, it's time to get out your highlighter. It's time to get your glasses out. Like, you need to read that and make sure you understand what you're about to agree to. And we're going to talk about organizations and stuff where you don't have an NDA specifically, but when you do get set an NDA or a contract, reading it over and asking questions and get responses in writing. So you'll often see, we'll go over some language that you can see often in contracts as well. But it's okay to ask for revisions. Something that we'll mention later on too is separation agreements. But for example, in a recent job in a separation agreement, I read it through and I realized that there was a non-disparagement agreement only for me to not say anything negative about the organization that I was leaving. It wasn't a mutual one. And so I went back and I said, I won't sign this unless it's a mutual non-disparagement agreement. And that was something that they were totally fine with. Revisions are okay. It is okay to ask for changes or clarification. The only thing I'll say is that get everything in writing. So, a verbal agreement is not enough unless it's written down. You can't go back and say like, hey, you said this, and so like this is what the protocol should be, or this should be the understanding. So if it's not already included, get in writing, whether email or within the contract itself, what the protocol is for when harassment or discrimination has been reported. So you know beforehand what the process is, and it being in writing can make you go back to HR or whoever you're supposed to be reporting it to, and be like, hey, this is what you said the process is. I am holding you accountable to your words. So I've definitely been guilty of not really reading my contracts and NDAs, and going forward, I've always read them, and there's never been no two contracts or NDAs have been the same for me. They always have something kind of sneaky in there. Not, I don't know if it's intentionally sneaky, but stuff that I am glad that I caught and I've asked for revisions or clarification and got in writing. And so when it does come to the case of like me having to act on any kind of harassment or sexual discrimination, or if I'm helping navigate someone else, I can tell them, this is what your contract says, this is the agreed upon protocol, this is what we should do, or hey, I emailed HR, this is what they said we should do, we can hold them accountable to this process. So read your NDA, go get yourself a highlighter, and make sure that you understand what you're agreeing to ahead of time.
And of course, if you are signing up to work for like a small organization or like a community-based organization, like I think something that folks really need, like I know that a lot of folks are in like beginning stages of their career, and they want to take whatever like opportunity that comes along to them. But before you rush into like signing with an organization or like a C4 or a campaign, like be cognizant of like what your community says, like especially like if you have if people, like don't discount what they have to say. And if you for like larger organizations, one a very helpful tool is like Glassdoor. You think Glassdoor.com is like only for like companies, but like no, it actually applies to like a lot of nonprofits as well. Like how well do they respect your boundaries? Like what have people coming out of the organization have said, right? So that's something that it is also in your toolbox before you sign on. This is a time, this is a time and place where you have power over your potential employer before you sign your contract, because they want you. But again, you're the one who has to decide whether you want them. So this is one of the most powerful moments that you may have in your time with your employer.
Yeah, and then also Robin in the chat made a really great point, is that a lot of these NDAs and non-disparagement agreements and contracts are sometimes just pulled randomly online or written by lawyers. And I've had times where I've asked questions about an NDA and they're like, we actually haven't thought about that situation, or we haven't thought about what we do if there was a case of sexual harassment or discrimination. So asking for revisions or clarification makes causes HR, whoever's in charge of the contract, actually like think through scenarios and what we should do. So totally right. Like a lot of these have not been made with a whole lot of thought behind them. And so by asking these questions, you're really helping flesh out like what the processes actually are, because they're kind of doing it just to like cover themselves, but also, you know, there should be a plan that if it's not in the contract, what is the situation for someone gets harassed or discriminated against? If it's not in the contract, then like they're going to have to figure it out on the fly, opposed to if we ask these questions ahead of time, we can kind of help inspire change of actually creating a policy or some kind of protocol.
Yeah. Oh, Lily, by the way, this is something that I'm going to ask over and over again. Who is the HR department for? Is it for you?
I would say it's for the company, but I think there are some wonderful people that work in HR, but at the end of the day, like you're signing these things to protect your campaign or the organizations you work for. It's ultimately you're signing a non-disparagement agreement, so nothing can harm the candidate. And like, you know, we don't want to necessarily hurt the organizations or the candidates that we work for. I mean, we do this work and we ask for changes in our NDAs or look at these things carefully and try to make changes in our workplaces so we can improve things for everyone. And so there are some wonderful people in HR, and HR departments have done some great work, but also like you need to be proactive and ask these questions and make sure that like these things are fleshed out, because HR isn't necessarily always going to be the ones that are thinking this through. And sometimes there isn't even an HR department. So yeah, that's a good question, Tony. All right, zero tolerance. This is a phrase that drives me crazy. I see it in so many contracts. I have it told to me when I've been, you know, whenever I interview with places, I always ask them about their discrimination and sexual harassment policy, and all the time I get told they have a zero tolerance policy. Zero tolerance doesn't really mean anything. It really varies from place to place, but everyone likes to say it. And that it I've had it where I have asked HR companies or I've asked HR like, what is zero tolerance? And they say, well, it means that we tolerate zero harassment. I'm like, okay, well, this harassment is happening and this person's not getting fired. So like, what does it really mean? And so if you see zero tolerance in a contract, like, and it's not defined on what it means, ask them. Because I think it's like a nice word that means really nothing unless you put a definition behind it. So I've seen zero tolerance means that like if you get reported, you're out. I've seen zero tolerance mean that like after they fully investigated, the person proves it beyond a reasonable doubt, and whoever is coming forward with a claim has evidence, that's where zero tolerance kicks in. I've seen zero tolerance mean zero tolerance after they get 3 strikes. Like zero tolerance. Yeah, that's crazy. That happened to me before where I was reporting someone multiple times and like having evidence, or like, okay, well, if he does it 3 more times, and like that's when zero tolerance kicks. I'm like, that's not what zero means. That's 3. That's not zero.
Great tolerance, yes.
Yeah, so zero tolerance, yeah, exactly. And it's also like as I mentioned before, is that like the person that sexually harassed me was a coworker that I was really close to, and I was in a rural part of the country, and it was me and just this coworker, and I thought he was my friend, and I was overreacting, and I just felt uncomfortable. And so I thought that like, you know, I thought that if there was a zero tolerance policy that like he would get instantly fired, as he should have been, but like campaigns definitely create a mentality of like we got to stick together, we're all struggling together, and sometimes you just like endure things because that's what's expected of you. But yeah, zero tolerance really doesn't mean anything, and a lot of companies just like to say, or organizations and campaigns like to say it because it sounds really serious and um like it actually means anything. But like zero tolerance, I've never actually seen means zero tolerance. It usually means like prove it to us, and even then, you know, like if there's 2 months left to the election, we'll fire him after. I've seen that happen so many times where they just kind of run it out the clock, and zero tolerance is really means nothing. So if you see it in a contract, either like ask for it to be defined or it really means nothing and should be clarified on what they actually mean by that.
Yeah, so kind of like treat zero tolerance as like, when you see like all natural on like food labels, it's like a big burger.
Exactly. Cool. So if you're an independent contractor, intern, etc., and you weren't given a contract or an NDA to sign, you still have rights. This is definitely more of a gray area, but same way before that, like before you accept a job, that's where you have the most power. And so, get everything in writing. If there are things that you definitely want to know, that like if you are still, just because you are a temporary worker or you're an independent contractor or an intern, even if you're not signing a full NDA, like you still should get everything in writing, and you can still have your employer, even if it's temporary, held accountable if something happens to you while you're working there. And so even if it's informal, like an email just detailing like, if this happens to me, what do I do? Getting an email or even asking for like a basic contract. I do contract work as well, and sometimes we sign contracts with campaigns, just to, just temporary ones, and they can be pretty basic. But just even asking that ahead of time, like this is before you sign anything, is when you have the most leverage. And no volunteers can't be abused. So like any of these can be like anybody who is working on a campaign or being involved in it, like you have rights and you have leverage to ask for things. And we'll go over too that um like sexual harassment doesn't only apply to your coworkers. It can also be harassment that you feel from volunteers, or from like other contractors, or from really anyone. Like the same way that like if you go to a restaurant, like you're not allowed to harass the employees. Like it's doesn't necessarily have to be your coworkers.
So yeah, coming at this from like the immigrant rights perspective, a lot of the undocumented folks without work authorization, for example, like TPS or DACA, a lot of people without those authorizations, are not able to work as like a full-time employee. So a lot of oftentimes, they will work with organizations as like independent contractors or as an LLC. So I mean, we're going to talk definitely more about this as deeper into the training. But to be an active ally, even if you are work authorized, I kind of you just like being aware of like if there's like a disparity between like how you are treated as somebody with like a full like a full-time position slash like like a contract that's legally binding, as opposed to like a contractor who is a contractor only probably because like they may not have status. So yeah, just be cognizant of like how different folks are being treated. So we're gonna get into the workplace part of the presentation. So we talk about like everything that has happened beforehand. I know it's a lot, but like when what do you do when it actually happens?
So be an active ally. So since my incident in when I was harassed on a campaign, I have tried to be as the best ally as I could be, and try to affect change wherever I can. But I am a big advocate for in-person trainings. This is something that I would go and bother my HR team like every single day, being like, when are we having our in-person training? When are we having our in-person training? Some states require like a basic online training, like for example, in California, companies or organizations with like a certain number of employees have to do a online training. I've done this on a couple campaigns. They're never specific to like progressive spaces or campaigns in general. And they are always kind of outdated and vague, and are really just for so like our state required. And I don't think they are ever enough. I feel like a lot of people just kind of like click through them and like half watch them. And so I like doing like in-person trainings, especially ones that are focused on progressive workspaces. I've gone through a couple of those trainings and they're really, really helpful. And my favorite part too is that like you can see who's in the room with you. you have to do activities, you have to write down values, you have to kind of have this set understanding when you're all in the same room. And so I've had it happen to me before where I've had people say like, "Oh, I didn't know I was not allowed to say that," or "I wasn't allowed to do that." Like, I didn't know I wasn't allowed to like touch someone's leg or something. I'm like, "Yeah, that should be obvious," but like, I was like, "No, I know you know that because we sat through the same training and like physical contact between like employees is not allowed, like especially unconsented contact." So like I really like in-person trainings because like you can see who's there, you can make sure they're paying attention, and like they shouldn't ever be optional, they have to be like required. I advocate for in-person trainings. I know that's difficult with COVID, so like online trainings are good as well. I would always advocate that they should be specialized in like progressive politics, and if they're not, then at least like up to date with like gender politics and just kind of like going into more depth of just like from more of a progressive lens. And you know, those are definitely a little bit harder to find, but they're worth doing. And then I think also saying values as an organization, campaign, etc., is really helpful. I've done this a couple times where we kind of talk about like how we want to treat each other and how we want to be treated, and what our general values are. So like we believe in tolerance, we believe in equality, equity, we believe in clear communication, we believe in respect. And just having that be a conversation between employees, it can feel a little corny at times. Like, you know, we got out on the chalkboard and like wrote it down and like made sure everyone read the same words of what our values are. And after I did that, I felt a lot better just making sure that like we were putting our values on paper instead of just assuming that everyone had shared values or had good intentions. Because I've made that mistake before. And then it wasn't until someone that I worked with that I assumed was, you know, pro LGBTQ plus that until they said something homophobic that I realized like, oh, okay, we are not on the same page here. We didn't have a conversation about values at all. And so I kind of just assumed that because they were a progressive that they were they had similar values to me. So being an active ally is just thinking through like how you can help affect change in your workplace that benefits everyone and also just makes it clear to folks like what the process is if they get harassed. And so by asking those questions to HR during your contract too, like that is information that you can share with your coworkers and you should share with your coworkers. Like not as like Tony mentioned that like this might be some people's first campaign, first organization, or maybe this is like the first time you've really thought like deeply about harassment and discrimination within your workplace. And so like the things that you learn by talking with HR is stuff that it should be public knowledge and stuff that you can share. And so by asking those questions and like making sure that information is public knowledge, HR isn't necessarily going to do that, but you can help affect change that way.
So wait, Lily, you're saying that HR is not necessarily your friend?
I would say that they're not always there to educate you. They are there. Sometimes I wish, I mean, always, I wish HR was more proactive in preventing things opposed to being there to like handle cases afterwards. I have never worked anywhere where like there was a conversation about what sexual harassment, like what you do when you get harassed or discriminated against. It's not until you speak to HR that they let you know what their process is. I think everyone should be empowered to learn like what the process actually is instead of being surprised when it actually happens to you and having to come forward.
Yeah. So adding on to my previous point about working with contractors, so being an active ally just means looking at like how the most marginalized folks within the community are treated in your organization and in your workplace. As I said, if you have subcontractors and independent contractors and LLCs working with you, do they have like the same kind of protections? And can you advocate for them? Is there something that you can do? And as Lily said, when you are setting the values, you don't necessarily have to be a member of the effective group to set the values. In fact, it shouldn't always have to be that, right? Like I don't have to, be the only person who talks about like anti-Asian racism or like homophobia. Like you can be a, like a cis straight white guy and and still talk about like like how do we make our organization have like a more inclusive value. So making sure that the work doesn't always fall on like the marginalized. So so that's just something important to keep in mind, that because like we are already taking on the additional stress of like our lived experiences, being in in marginalized identities. That's being a proactive ally as opposed to just like a passive bystander. Would also require you to be proactively creating those spaces for those you work with.
So what to do when you experience harassment? Again, this is going to vary from place to place, especially whatever your organization has laid out as their policy. But as I said before, like reportable harassment isn't limited to coworkers, volunteers, consultants, etc. apply as well. No one is allowed to make you or anyone else within the workplace feel uncomfortable. So volunteers apply, consultants, like this is a two-way street. Like no one is allowed to make you feel discriminate, or no one's allowed to make you feel uncomfortable in the workplace. They don't just have to be coworkers. And I did not understand that on my first campaign. I let some volunteers treat me horribly and harass me and say just awful stuff to me, and I was like, well, I need them to knock on doors tonight, like I can endure it. And like I didn't know that that was something I could go to my boss and say like, hey, I know this is going to affect our goal of like how many doors we knock tonight, but like I know that I'm not allowed, like I'm not supposed to be putting up with this. Like so like knowing that like this can apply to anyone, you don't have to tolerate this from anyone. And this is all reportable stuff as well. And the biggest thing I've learned is collect evidence and create a paper trail. Um, this is tough. Like this is I've had people that have been harassed or like um actually like assaulted in the workplace and being asked like, oh, do you have proof that that happened? Like, how are you supposed to be taking pictures or prepared for something that is totally unexpected? And that was something that I really struggled with too, is that when I reported my harassment, is that I was asked like, oh, where's your evidence? And I had to go through like my old text logs and like try to find people that I had talked to before, and like any evidence that you can provide is helpful. And like having that prepared, even if someone makes you uncomfortable, even if it's not full on harassment yet, like starting to collect that information, even if it's just like writing an email and sending it to yourself where it's time stamped, or writing it in a notes app and taking a screenshot so it's time stamped, or taking like screenshots of conversations you have with people, like that can all count as evidence. And so I would create a paper trail as soon as you can. um, and that is one of the most important things I had. And when you do speak to HR, make sure that you are taking notes. Anything that verbally happens, and having like any verbal agreements that happen in there. I've had HRs tell me like, oh, I'm gonna do this, and I didn't never get it in writing. So when I tried to follow up and be like, hey, you said you'd do this, they'd be like, I don't know, like I don't remember that. I've literally had that happen to me before. So after I have conversations with HR, I like to take my notes and write them in an email, send it to them, and be like, hey, thank you for talking to me today. This is what I have. This is what we agreed the next step would be. And like, this is the timeline that we agreed on. So that's something that I think is really important, is when you talk to HR, is like create a paper trail. Also, what can be helpful is setting like a realistic timeline. And so this doesn't drag on forever, because I've had campaigns that will basically have a harassment claim go on for a long enough that they don't have to fire the person until the campaign's over. So having this happen quickly, set goals and expectations for what they should actually be doing, and what time that like what the timeline is for a solution, is really helpful. But yeah, the main thing I'll say with anything is like take notes, and then anything HR tells you, like have it in writing.
Right. I get some tools that, you may have on your hand is, I guess definitely, taking notes while you're in the meeting, taking out, like writing it up afterwards, like, or some, if it's allowed, gets to, record it. And, cause like something that you don't want to turn this into is like, he said, she said, And like people say, oh, you must be misremembering things and gaslighting you. So that's why like this physical trail is like very very important, not only for like that purposes, but not just so that you're not gaslit and you're not constantly doubting yourself whether this happened or not. So here's what we what we look like after our experiences working in the nonprofit industrial complex and in the campaign world. um, So, Lily, how do you deal with NDAs and non-disparagement agreements?
Yeah, so I mentioned, so I'm under a couple of NDAs currently, and I'm not going to encourage anyone to do anything here that would break their NDAs or get any legal trouble. But reading them and understanding like what you are allowed to do and not do. And especially this is where when you're leaving, you may be asked to sign a separation agreement. This might be a good chance to renegotiate like what's in your non-disclosure or your non-disparagement agreement. So as I mentioned before, when I did leave an organization, I made sure that my non-disparagement agreement was a mutual one, and I refused to sign until I got that. And then also at a past organization, um, as well, I was unhappy with how they handled sexual harassment and discrimination within the workplace. That I wrote a set of values and what I thought going forward that they should do, and that my non-disparagement agreement would only kick in. My non-disparagement agreement towards them would only kick in if they had reviewed the notes that I had set, and that they were going to be that action was going to be taken on them for the organization moving forward. So like when you're leaving and a job or you're moving on to somewhere else, like you have another sense of power because they want you to sign that non disclosure or non disparagement agreement or that separation agreement. So same way before you take the job, like you're in a position of power, you're also in a position of power when you have to sign any of those contracts to make sure that like it isn't just only to the benefit of the company, that like also you are protected, and that if you do want to share your story, that like you can work with your HR department or whoever would potentially be getting you in trouble if you say something wrong, to make sure that like you actually are understanding what is and isn't in your non-disclosure agreement. So some of my non-disclosure agreements, like if I say anything, it says that they're going to send lawyers after me. Some of them are a lot more vague. So reading that and then making sure you're just on the same page before you leave, and then renegotiating anything or making revisions before you sign anything before you leave is helpful as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I can cite a specific example. So someone that I know was let go from this organization, and they signed a non-disparagement agreement. And as they were applying for a new position somewhere else, they had to get like a reference from like a previous employer, and the previous employer, the one that had signed the non-disparagement agreement with, had given them a very negative review going forward. And so what they did was they went back to their previous employer and brought up the receipts. Hey, you signed this. This is legally binding, and yet you just you violated it. So as a result, they rescinded that negative recommendation and replaced it with like a positive one, and the person was able to get a job at the new organization that they want. Yeah. So know that gets also in your power. You know that you can use it to help yourself. To move forward in your life. And so I guess like the last point and this point kind of like mixes. How do you share your story and how do you tell your story? Is to kind of like just like the example that I brought up, right? We we don't use any specific examples. We haven't used any names. In fact, we also avoided using pronouns to talk about what happened to us. So making it like untraceable. When you're telling this when you're telling this to others is like a very key way to is like a very key way to share your story with without being being held up by your non-disclosure / non-disparagement agreements. And as for advocating for change, I mean we also did that as share that as well, right? But there are steps that you can take from your from the slide that we had about how to be how to be an ally slide. So, but there are steps that you can take afterwards. For example, Glassdoor reviews are are there for you to help. If you work, especially if you work for like a big organization, or where people will take a look at it before they apply, so that they are aware of what the conditions are like at that employer. And again, if folks within your network are applying for those positions, to be cognizant and to share what your experience was with them, and have empower people to make the choices that will best serve them. And of course, one thing that I really want to share is all of this kind of affects your mental health in like a really bad way. Dealing with the stress. It's it's something that I still take with me every now and then. At one of my jobs, three staffers of color were sent on an assignment that that we none of us really actually wanted to go to, but they just singled the three of us out. And it's something that I still talk about a lot, and it's something that I reflect on a lot. But one thing that has helped me is reaching out to someone to talk about it, like a professional. Otherwise I think I would probably carry that trauma everywhere I go, and have that be have it affect me in a way that that kind of does not serve me. So I think looking for mental support is extremely crucial. If you go through some of these events.
Yeah, I'll say too, it's that I experience this a lot where once I start speaking about my story and making myself as someone in the office that was advocating for change, I had a lot of people coming to me instead of HR or their bosses about sexual harassment and discrimination. So I got myself involved in a lot of things that, as it said in the second slide, I'm a digital person. I work in digital. I write I write emails. I do stuff like that. I was not necessarily, um, prepared to have this kind of second job as a liaison between people experiencing discrimination, harassment in the office, and HR or their bosses. And I was really honored that people felt comfortable coming to me, but at a certain point, I was carrying a lot of people's experiences and stories on my shoulders. And so I think too, it's wonderful to have people like that in the office that you can trust and come to. And I really appreciate that people trusted me that way. But I also want to help create workplaces where um, you don't feel uncomfortable to come and report these cases, or there's a clear structure of how you do it. And it shouldn't just take a random person in the office speaking out about this for these conversations to be had. So while I absolutely love that people trust me and come to me about this, I hope going forward I can help create workplaces where I can also be that person, but also there is someone who that's actually their job, and will do a good job with it as well. That if I send them to HR, or this is in places, I absolutely think that there should be a critical conversation of what HR's role actually is and how they serve in progressive spaces, but in spaces where that is the reality, making sure that they work in a compassionate way and are actually a trusted person or group to go to. Because a lot of times I would feel like something needed to happen and I wasn't a person empowered to do so. All I could do was give advice and help navigate. And then there's a lot of people who just never felt comfortable going to HR because HR didn't make themselves available that way or make it clear that they even cared. So I think that's something I really want to help inspire, is that we create spaces for people to actually know where they're supposed to go and how to advocate for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something I really admire a lot about, like my co-panelist Lily, is that, she has, gone from place to place, and she carries that, like torch. I mean, it's just not like, get, she didn't only just like change her one campaign. She brings, she brought her values from one campaign and like applied it to the other, and she was very, very proactive about it. I mean, it's something that, that I'm actively trying to do, to try to use like my past trauma, so that, it so that it doesn't affect like, on people down the line. One, yeah, got one of, a supervisor of mine had, had treated me in like a, not in like the best way, and and I was able to take that, and and when I became a supervisor of my own, I was very, very proactive in like making sure that, that I was not emulating or like repeating that behavior, and I was proactive about it. I think, that's something that, you can take from like one place to the other. So with that being said, I think, yeah. So we're gonna open up the floor to questions. If folks have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat.
And I love everybody sharing resources and stuff in the chat. This is really, really helpful. There are definitely resources out there, and I really love everyone for joining us today. I just wanted, we are not experts in this. A lot of this is anecdotal and personal experiences, but these conversations, I am shocked how little they happen in progressive spaces. Like, I remember writing an email campaign around Brett Kavanaugh, and the whole thing around it was like, believe women, and we believe it, women, we support women. And like in that workplace, we were having like active sexual harassment claims that were like, just that was one of the cases where they were just trying to push an employee out after the election was over. So it's like, okay, so we're writing these emails and we're saying our values is that we like believe women and survivors and stuff like that, but are actively not being proactive and supporting like survivors in our workplace.
Right. There's no subtitle, after "Believe Women" only when it's like politically convenient to us. No, it's "Believe
Yeah,
Women."
exactly.
Again, like if there are like more anonymous things that you want to connect with us about, or like if you want to connect with us about anything else, really, our emails are on the next slide. And we're not qualified, HR professionals, nor are we lawyers. So we can ask us, like come on days on end about like like what's a good A/B testing strategy, but yeah, but we are, this is one way that that we are, helping to create like the progressive strategies, for creating workplaces that really reflect our values as who we are. And we really appreciate you for joining us. If there are no questions, I am going to go to the next slide.
So yeah, please reach out to us if you have any questions or you just want to chat. I really, I feel so much less alone. Like, I can't imagine if I could just go to like little Lily in when I was 19, like crying in a room by myself or with just the HR team and just like being so confused and scared and being like, this sucks, but like you're gonna be able to make changes and like help other people navigate through this. Like, we are all in that position of power where we can take this information and affect changes in our workplaces. So like, if you just want to like chat, or you want to share your story with me, like that, I had that a lot where sometimes people don't even like want to go to HR or anything. They just like want to talk about it. They just want to like be heard. I am absolutely there. My email is always open. I'm Lily at foundationbluemedia.com. And again, like I can't speak especially to like your NDA or stuff. Like if you even want me to like read your NDA or your contract or anything, like I've done that plenty. And I can give some advice, not as a lawyer or an HR specialist, but just like someone who can read stuff and tell when you're being taken advantage of. So please reach out if you have anything you'd like to share with me or just any questions. Love to hear from folks.
Yeah, and likewise, like yeah, I am, I'm here, and I'm here to listen, and I'm here, I'm here to be an ally to you, in whatever situation that you're in. So like if you have those kinds of similar concerns, I am here, and if you just want to, to see if like your next workplace will be like an equitable workplace, I am more than happy to connect with you all. Yeah. Uh, and also, just as a personal plug, we are hiring for a development manager. So, and like, we have a fairly good harassment policies in place. So, if you are looking, looking for a position, feel free to email me as well.
Sweet. Well, I don't think we got anything else unless there's any questions.
We have 5 minutes, so if you have
Yeah.
any questions, A/B testing or like social media strategies, feel free to throw them out there too.
Feel free to email me your favorite TikToks.
That too, yeah.
I hope everybody's doing okay. Election's right around this the corner.
Yeah, and keep an eye out for your friends who are on campaigns. I know that there's an intense Virginia governor's race and like New Jersey's governor's race as well as like the state legislatures. So those folks are probably like the most stressed out right now and like may not be dealing with like some of these things like really well, because they are just so close to the crunch time. So be an active ally, the way that you can be from the outside.
Oh, something we didn't mention too is that I think actually there's some races in Virginia that have unionized too. So that's another, I think that's more new, but like also if you're working through a union of any kind. Oh, a general question. Let's see. This feels relevant to this panel. Yeah, so even I think this stuff still applies in workplaces, just in general. That's definitely so I'm responding to a question that's in the chat, Tony. You want to read it as well. But yeah, how do you move that
I'm still dealing with it. I've been in therapy for about a year now actually, and it's helped me a lot. I get like that, they're like, for example, like my boss, who was triggering me has like the name of like one of my coworkers, and like I think about her sometimes, but like having really worked with like like my like my therapist to really talk through things, and really like seeing like how much I've grown as a person, and like and like being reminded of the power that I hold. That has helped me like move forward, move past a lot of these things. I mean, they're always going to be there, but like it's like a scar, right? I mean, you heal over it, and again, it'll be like a tougher exterior, as you grow. And yeah.
What makes me feel a lot better too is that when I was interviewing, when I interviewed after last year, I was talking to a bunch of different organizations, and on my first call, I would always ask about discrimination and sexual harassment policy and like how they were personally going to help. Like, I would share my personal stories or even be vague about it and ask them how they were going to respond. And if they didn't have a good response, that was probably not the right workplace for me. Kind of how we mentioned before, like before you sign a contract, like that's where your power is. And so I think a way to kind of prevent or you know have less anxiety is by asking these questions beforehand and like being confident that you understand what their position is and having it in writing. I think a lot of my anxiety came from like just personally not knowing what the process was and like what I was going to do if I was harassed or discriminated against in some way. And so I think a lot of the anxiety can be kind of helped ahead of time by just making sure that values are laid out and that you have these things in writing. And then like, if you ever need a buddy or someone to like talk through anxiety, you got my email, like reach out, I gotcha. But I feel like that was really helpful for me. And like, I had a lot of organizations be like, oh, we haven't really thought about that. Let me get back to you. And then like some that had like a really great thing, really great policy and were very in depth about it. Um, but we're getting a message that our You could definitely have trauma from an office job. Yeah. I mean, like, I think this doesn't just apply to progressive spaces. This is everywhere. And like, you know, be nice to your waiters, be nice to everyone that you like interact with. Like everyone experiences this and it varies from position to position. And like I've had people that come to me that were being harassed while working at like a coffee shop and I gave them advice. This isn't limited to progressive spaces, um, but yeah, definitely wherever you are, you deserve to be treated with like love and respect and tolerance and kindness. And me and Tony are here to just hype you up and remind you of that whenever you need us. But we're getting a message that our time is up. You guys have our contact information. Please reach out. And we appreciate you so much for showing up today and being an active participant in these conversations. And this is really how we make change. Is by making sure that we bring light to these issues.
Yeah, again, we are so happy to have shared this hour with you, and again, and we do hope that you take what's valuable out of this presentation and the space that we've held, and we'll be continuing to hold for you all through our email addresses. So thank you very much, and close your ranks.
Oh, we're not able to type in the chat, unfortunately. We don't have the same option. But I'll say mine verbally again. Mine's Lily, Lily, at foundationbluemedia.com.
And I am
yeah.
Tony, T as in Toronto, O as in Ontario, N as in New York, and Y as in York, at immigrantsrising.org.
If anyone that does have, we don't have the ability to type in the chat, but if anyone would be willing to type that into the chat for other folks, that would be a huge help. We just don't have access to the same chat that y'all do.
Discrimination.
No, we love you, Netroots. Thank you for letting us present. This has been a dream come true. I used to go to
shout out to our
as a kid.
host.
Huh?
Shout out to our host, by the way. She has been keeping us in time and everything, and like helping us set up. So
holding it down.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Julia's typing it. So in the chat now, there's Tony's name or Tony's email.
Thank you to Julia Temple. No, I can't be right. Templeton. Yeah, for all of this.
Yes, Julia is fantastic, and I thank you everyone who contributed to the conversation today. And yeah, we're here if you need us. So, oh yes, and the host is amazing. We love the host. We love Netroots. And I was a little bit worried about how this panel was going to go with it being from offline to being on in person to offline, but y'all guys are amazing, and definitely felt like we were having a good conversation, and I hope everyone learned something from this. But I think it is time for us to bounce.